For 12 months, we ran two identical Mustang GTs side by side, one exclusively on 87 octane regular, the other exclusively on 93 octane premium. Same driver rotation, same routes, same maintenance schedule, same 5.0 Coyote V8 under the hood. I've built and tuned hundreds of these engines, and I expected premium to win in every single category without question. After 12,000 miles, 4 dyno sessions, 3 bore scope inspections, and one extremely detailed fuel spreadsheet, the results didn't go the way any of us predicted. Let's break down exactly what happened. Before we get into results, you need to understand why this test even matters. The Gen 3 Coyote engine in the Mustang GT runs an 11:1 static compression ratio from the factory, and Ford recommends premium fuel for peak performance. But recommended isn't the same as required. Unlike older engines that would knock themselves apart on low-octane fuel, every Mustang GT built in the last 2 decades has a knock sensor system that constantly monitors combustion and pulls timing the instant it detects detonation. That single fact is the reason this whole experiment was even possible, and it's the reason the outcome surprised us. We set up both cars identically. Same tire pressure, same oil weight, same alignment specs, same air filter, the same starting odometer range of 87,000 miles, so wear patterns would behave similarly. We installed OBD2 data loggers on both vehicles that recorded spark timing, knock retard events, air-fuel ratio, coolant temperature, and intake air temperature on every single drive. This wasn't guesswork. Every claim I'm about to make came from logged data, not seat-of-the-pants feel. We also controlled for the human factor, which most casual comparisons completely ignore. 4 different drivers rotated between the 2 cars every single week, so no single person's driving habits could skew the results toward one fuel grade or the other. Each driver logged their mileage, their general driving conditions, and whether the drive included any towing, spirited driving, or purely commuter-style traffic. Every fill-up was recorded by hand with the pump price, the gallons purchased, and the odometer reading because we didn't want to rely on the dashboard's trip computer, which tends to overstate real-world fuel economy on these cars by anywhere from 3 to 6%. Both engines received identical oil, identical spark plugs installed at the same mileage interval, and identical air filters swapped on the same schedule, so nothing outside of the fuel itself could explain differences in the data. It's also worth explaining what actually happens inside a combustion chamber when octane rating changes, because this is the physics that drives every result in this test. Octane rating measures a fuel's resistance to auto-ignition under pressure, not how much energy it contains. Higher octane fuel resists igniting prematurely when compressed, which allows an engine to run more ignition time in advance and higher cylinder pressures before detonation, sometimes called knock or pinging, occurs. Detonation happens when pockets of the air-fuel mixture ignite on their own from heat and pressure, rather than igniting cleanly from the spark plug at the intended moment. Those secondary uncontrolled explosions create violent pressure spikes that hammer the piston crown and can damage rings, bearings, and head gaskets if left unchecked. The Coyote's knock sensors are essentially microphones bolted to the engine block, listening for that specific acoustic signature of detonation and telling the computer to instantly retard timing the moment they hear it. That protective response is the entire reason this test was safe to run for a full year without risking either engine. Day 1, we took both cars to the same dyno on the same day, back-to-back 10 minutes apart, to establish a clean baseline. The 93 octane car put down 412 horsepower and 391 pound-feet of torque to the wheels. The 87 octane car put down 401 horsepower and 384 pound-feet. That's an 11 horsepower gap right out of the gate, which lines up almost exactly with what Ford's own engineers have said publicly about the difference premium fuel makes on this platform. At wide open throttle, the ECU on the 87 octane car was pulling roughly 2 to 3 degrees of timing compared to the 93 octane car, and that retarded timing is where nearly all of that horsepower difference came from. This part surprised nobody. Everyone on our team expected this exact result from day 1. What surprised us started showing up around month 2. We assumed the 87 octane car would be logging knock retard constantly, every single drive, because that's the story you hear from car forums and from parts counter employees. Reality looked different. During normal driving, meaning anything under about 70% throttle, the data logger on the 87 octane car showed almost no measurable knock retard at all. The knock events were heavily concentrated in wide open throttle pulls, hard highway merges, and hot weather full throttle acceleration above 95 degrees ambient. In stop-and-go traffic, cruising on the highway, and light to moderate acceleration, both cars ran nearly identical timing tables. The ECU simply wasn't finding a reason to pull timing because the engine wasn't under enough load to approach the knock threshold on 87 octane in those conditions. This matters because most Mustang GT owners are not spending their daily commute at wide open throttle. If your driving is 90% normal traffic and occasional highway on-ramps, the horsepower penalty from 87 octane essentially disappears from your actual seat time. You'd only feel that gap during hard pulls, and even then, we're talking about a difference most drivers couldn't identify in a blind test without a dyno chart in front of them. Fuel economy told a more interesting story than we expected. Over the full 12 months, the 93 octane car averaged 21.4 miles per gallon combined across all the logged fill-ups. The 87 octane car averaged 20.9 miles per gallon combined. That's a real difference, about 2.5%. And it makes sense because premium fuel with more ignition timing, advanced typically extracts slightly more energy per gallon in an engine tuned to take advantage of it. But here's where the math gets interesting, and where a lot of online arguments about octane completely fall apart. Premium fuel in our area averaged 68 cents more per gallon than regular across the full year, tracking prices weekly. Even with the 87 octane car burning slightly more fuel to cover the same distance, the total fuel cost for the 87 octane car came in $412 cheaper over 12,000 miles. The efficiency gain from premium never came close to offsetting the price premium at the pump. This is the actual math that most enthusiast debates skip entirely because they focus on horsepower numbers and ignore the dollars and cents. If you're finding this useful so far, go ahead and hit that like button now, because the carbon buildup results in a few minutes genuinely changed how I think about fuel choice on direct injection engines. And you don't want to miss that part. Cold start behavior was nearly identical between the two cars. We logged startup timing, idle quality, and cold idle RPM stability across dozens of cold starts in both summer and winter conditions. There was no measurable difference in how either engine started or idled when cold. This makes sense, since knock is almost entirely a high-load, high-cylinder pressure phenomenon, and a cold idling engine simply isn't generating the combustion pressures where octane differences show up. Anyone claiming their engine starts noticeably rougher on regular fuel is very likely experiencing something else entirely, like a weak battery, old spark plugs, or a vacuum leak, not an octane-related issue. Throttle response is where subjective driver feel and objective data started to diverge, and this is worth talking about honestly. 3 of our 4 rotating drivers reported that the 93 octane car felt slightly snappier under hard acceleration, particularly from a stop. When we compared this feeling against the actual data logs, the difference was real but small, consistent with that 11 horsepower gap we measured on the dyno. The 4th driver couldn't tell any difference at all in blind rotation days when they didn't know which car they were driving. This tells you something important. The performance gap is real and measurable, but it lives mostly in your head unless you're regularly driving at the edge of the throttle map or tracking the car. We also ran both cars through a controlled towing test to see how the gap changed under sustained heavy load, since that's the condition where knock retard tends to show up most aggressively. Each car pulled an identical 3,500-pound trailer up the same 6-mile mountain grade, back-to-back, on the same afternoon with matching ambient temperatures around 88 degrees. This is where the 87 octane car's timing retard became far more consistent rather than the occasional wide-open throttle blip we saw in normal driving. Climbing that grade under load, the data logger showed the 87 octane engine holding 2 to 4 degrees of retarded timing almost continuously for most of the climb, while the 93 octane car ran close to its optimal timing map the entire way up. Coolant temperatures on the 87 octane car also ran about 6 degrees warmer at the top of the grade, which makes sense given the less efficient combustion under sustained load. Neither car overheated or threw a code, but this test told us clearly that towing or sustained mountain driving is exactly the scenario where premium fuel earns its keep on this engine, far more than casual commuting ever will. We also pulled and inspected the spark plugs from both engines at the 12-month mark, since plug condition often tells you things a bore scope alone can't. Both sets of plugs showed a light tan color on the electrode, which is generally considered a sign of a healthy air-fuel mixture and proper combustion on either fuel grade. The 87-octane engine's plugs showed slightly more carbon tracking near the base of the insulator, consistent with the heavier valve deposits we found during the bore scope inspections. But neither set showed any sign of pre-ignition damage, melted electrodes, or the kind of physical erosion you'd expect if the engine had actually been experiencing damaging levels of detonation rather than protective timing retard. Now let's get into the part of this test that actually changed my opinion on octane choice for daily driven Coyote engines, and that's long-term carbon buildup on the intake valves. The 5.0 Coyote uses direct injection, which means fuel is sprayed directly into the combustion chamber rather than onto the back of the intake valve. Direct injection engines are notorious for carbon buildup on the intake valves over time because there's no fuel washing over those valves to keep them clean the way port-injected engines naturally do. We scheduled bore scope inspections of both engines at 4,000 miles, 8,000 miles, and again at 12,000 miles to physically look at valve deposits through the spark plug holes and intake ports. At the 4,000-mile inspection, both engines showed light, comparable carbon deposits on the intake valves. No meaningful difference between the two. At 8,000 miles, we started to see a small divergence. The 87-octane engine showed slightly heavier deposits, though still within a range we'd call normal for a direct injection engine at that mileage. By 12,000 miles, the gap had grown more noticeable. The 87-octane engine's intake valves showed visibly heavier carbon buildup, enough that a technician looking at both bore scope images side by side could tell which engine ran on which fuel without being told. This wasn't catastrophic. We're not talking about restricted airflow or misfires, but it was a real, measurable, repeatable difference. Here's the mechanism behind it. Premium fuel typically contains a higher concentration of detergent additives designed to keep combustion chambers and valves cleaner, and the more complete combustion that comes with the extra octane and slightly more aggressive timing also tends to leave fewer unburned hydrocarbon byproducts behind. Lower octane fuel combined with the ECU occasionally retarding timing during hard pulls creates marginally less complete combustion under load, and over thousands of cycles that adds up on the valve surfaces. This is the one category in our entire test where premium fuel showed a clear, unambiguous, measurable long-term advantage. We also sent oil samples out for full laboratory analysis at every oil change throughout the year, checking for wear metals like iron, aluminum, copper, and lead that indicate internal engine wear. Across 4 oil changes on each vehicle, the wear metal counts were statistically indistinguishable between the two engines. No elevated bearing wear, no elevated cylinder wall wear, nothing that would suggest the 87-octane engine was mechanically suffering compared to the 93-octane engine. This confirmed what the knock sensor data already told us. The ECU was doing its job protecting the engine from damaging detonation, even under load, by pulling timing before knock could cause physical harm. The car was losing a little power and building slightly more carbon, but it wasn't wearing itself out. If you own a Mustang GT and you're debating this exact question for your own car, stick around for the next part because I'm about to give you the actual dollar figures for the full year and the recommendation I genuinely give my own family based on everything we measured. And if this kind of real-world data-backed testing is something you want to see more of on this channel, go ahead and subscribe now so you don't miss the next long-term test we're running. Let's talk total cost of ownership across the full 12 months, because this is where most of the online octane debate completely ignores reality. The 87-octane car cost $412 less in fuel over the year, as I mentioned earlier, but we also need to account for the carbon buildup difference, since heavier valve deposits eventually mean an induction service or walnut blasting to restore full airflow and throttle response. A typical intake valve cleaning service on a direct injection V8 like this runs somewhere between $250 and $450, depending on the shop and the extent of the buildup. Based on the trajectory we saw across our bore scope inspections, The 87-octane engine would likely need that service somewhat sooner than the 93-octane engine, maybe a year or two earlier in a typical ownership timeline. Even accounting for that future cost, the fuel savings from running 87-octane still came out ahead over the 12-month period we tested, though the gap narrows considerably once you factor in that eventual cleaning service. Resale value is worth a quick mention too, even though it's harder to measure directly in a controlled test like this. Neither car showed any drivetrain codes, warning lights, or performance complaints during the entire test period, and Ford's factory warranty doesn't distinguish between fuel grades as long as you're using at least 87 octane, since that's within their published fuel specification. Running regular fuel in a Mustang GT does not void your warranty and does not constitute abuse of the engine, contrary to what you might read in some forum threads. Ford designed this engine with a NOx sensor system specifically so it could safely run on regular fuel when needed, even though premium unlocks its full potential. So here's the actual recommendation based on everything the data showed us across 12 full months and 12,000 real-world miles. If you daily drive your Mustang GT in normal traffic, commute mostly at partial throttle, and rarely run it hard at wide-open throttle, 87 octane is a genuinely reasonable choice that will save you real money without meaningfully damaging your engine. The horsepower loss mostly disappears in everyday driving conditions, the wear metal data showed no elevated engine damage, and the fuel savings were real and measurable. The trade-off you're accepting is faster carbon buildup on the intake valves, which means budgeting for an induction service a bit sooner than you otherwise would. If you regularly track your car, autocross it, tow with it, drive in consistently hot climates above 95 degrees, or simply want maximum power and the cleanest possible long-term engine internals, 93 octane is worth the extra cost. The horsepower gain is real, the throttle response improvement is real, even if subtle, and the reduced carbon buildup means fewer maintenance headaches down the road. For track cars and modified Mustangs running more aggressive tunes, premium fuel isn't optional at all, since many performance tunes are calibrated specifically around 91 or 93 octane and will pull significant power on regular fuel because the base timing tables assume premium is present. So the winner that surprised us wasn't a clean sweep for either fuel grade, which is honestly what made this test worth doing in the first place. 93 octane won on raw power, throttle response, and long-term valve cleanliness. 87 octane won on total cost, and it did so without causing any measurable mechanical damage over the course of a full year and 12,000 miles, something that goes directly against what a lot of car enthusiasts assume about running regular fuel in a performance engine. The Coyote's NOx sensor system is simply that good at protecting the engine while giving up power gracefully instead of allowing damage to occur. My personal takeaway after running this test is that the octane decision isn't really about protecting your engine from immediate damage, because modern NOx sensor technology has largely solved that problem. It's about which long-term trade-off you're willing to accept: slightly less power and slightly more carbon buildup in exchange for real fuel savings, or slightly higher fuel costs in exchange for maximum performance and cleaner valves over time. Neither choice is wrong, and neither choice is going to leave you stranded on the side of the road or blow up your engine, which is honestly the outcome most people expect before they see data like this. If you found this breakdown useful, drop a comment telling me which fuel grade you run in your own Mustang and why, because I want to see how closely real owner habits match up with what our data actually showed. Hit subscribe if you want to see the next long-term test we're running, and share this with anyone who's ever argued about octane in a parking lot, because now you've got actual numbers instead of opinions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.